two works I'm showing here, they're coming from a series of works I started 5 years ago, which was more like an interest in other people's models rather than my own. And as I have been at the Getty Research Institute, I looked around and I saw the models by John Lautner, which you see here, 3 examples of that. And those models of John Lautner, a very important architect from predominantly working in Los Angeles, they are completely full of, they're falling into pieces. They never were made for being representational models. They never were there to be convince a client or something. It was just purely for himself to kind of find out a volume on the site, on the landscape, or communicate this with the people in his office, which were doing actually the drawings. Apparently he wasn't a very good craftsman. And so from that interest, I could show on these models, which are, each of them is like this big. 12 of them are existing still, because when he was finished with the project, he threw everything away, and these 12 represent projects which he didn't build. You only see 3 here, but like basically, they just basically a coincidence, and he built 180 villas and many other buildings, so that only 12 models are kind of still there of these unrealized projects is, for me, a lucky coincidence. And from that interest into the models full of decay, small, going very close to see what the sculptural elements of these objects would be, I happened to work with Yuko and Sejima-san on the Venice Biennale in 2010. No, 2010 was it?
10.
I worked on, they invited me to take part in the show, which I was very happy about, and I kind of got to know the Sana's office a little better, and I kept going to visit them. In the first place, I just kept I wanted to go to see their buildings in Japan. And then I started to, I found that when I saw their office for the first time, I was actually really impressed, because they didn't seem to throw anything away. So what you saw there is a landscape of models, which they would kind of sometimes get back out of the heap, or discard, or you had all the stages of the many projects they work simultaneously on. At the same time, you have them in one room, which is very beautiful and very unique, I think, for architects. Usually you imagine a clean desk and 50 computer screens or something. And so here I found a sensibility which kind of reminded me on my own work, which is about paper, folding, seeing, at what point something is a representation of something. So if you take a sheet of paper and you fold it and you hold it up, you could imagine that's a roof. But if you just use it as a sheet of paper, it's of course, it's something for your notes. So the purpose of that can in an architect's office with a little bit of imagination can actually really shift very quickly.
You were following these for 3.5 years. So some of these models were right at the beginning, and I could tell from this
But
one.
you have seen them in the beginning too.
Exactly, I definitely saw them. Now, I recognize many of the shapes, and this is when the dining room was elongated, and it was actually in this position. I do find unusual too for most architects still are using CADs, but they really use models almost exclusively with us, when they were presenting ideas.
From the architects I know, it's very unusual to be sticking to a material for so long. They really come from the sculpture, and from the material, and I found this always very fascinating how the design process is going. The office is a jungle of models, which is really beautiful. Around that time, they were starting to work on the Grace Farm. And in the beginning, I saw all the models only kind of wrapped up with plastic, because they weren't presented yet, and I think they weren't signed off yet. And then, by my next visit, I would see these oval shapes hanging around, and I was thinking, so, that's interesting. Where is that going to? And they, eventually, I just kind of found out. I went there for 3.5 years, every half a year for a week. I found out that there are, what they will be about, and at that time, Sejima-san asked me whether I would consider to, bring my project towards the art project in the Grace Farms, and I thought, well, if it's serving the purpose, I certainly will consider that. And what you see up there in a very beautiful building, and which is actually looking really like the model, which is very remarkable. You see the different processes of like defining the underside of the roof, which I find is a very dominating, obviously, that's the thing which you remember tomorrow of the building. And so how the beams in the roof should be exposed or not exposed. And the other one, the smaller one, is about the shapes of the, the communal spaces within. So it's kind of studies of like how much of a volume should be there under the roof and how they should be distributed within the building. And the purpose why I thought this would be a good idea to show them, photograph them first place, but also show them here and make them a part of the building is because, of course, the building is representing an idea. And this, let's say an idea and an idealism is not exactly the same thing, but if you just kind of squint your eyes, it actually is the same thing. And so the idealism of Grace Farms and the idea behind the building, I thought, would be a very nice linkage between the purpose of the building and the building itself.